My family dumped Grandma in a nursing home and took her credit cards. They told me, "Stay away from her. She's crazy and broke." I was the only one visiting her for 3 years. After she passed, the lawyer called a meeting. He handed the entire family a bill for $500,000, then turned to me with a golden key. My dad's face turned white. "My name is Claire Weston. I am 31 years old. I work as an occupational therapist at a small rehabilitation clinic in Central Virginia. I drive a 6-year-old Honda Civic with a dent above the rear wheel well that I have never bothered to fix because it does not affect how the car runs, and I have other things to spend money on. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that has a broken elevator about once a month. I make a salary that is comfortable enough if you are careful, which I have learned to be. For 3 years, 1,094 days, I drove 38 minutes, every Sunday, every Wednesday, and eventually 5 days a week, to a nursing home called Meadow Ridge Care Center to sit with my grandmother. Nobody asked me to do that. Nobody paid me to do that. Nobody even acknowledged I was doing it. Not really. Not in any way that mattered, until it was too late for the acknowledging to cost them nothing. In fact, my family told me to stop. My own father called me on the phone and said, in a voice he uses when he wants to sound reasonable, that I needed to stay away from her, that she was confused, that she was getting difficult. That visiting was making things harder for everyone, including her. My Uncle Gary said she was losing her memory and becoming a burden. My Aunt Sheila said she was practically broke and that the family had everything handled. They had a name for what my grandmother was, a word they passed around between themselves the way families pass around inherited traits. She was a problem, and they had solved the problem. They had solved it by signing paperwork and finding a facility 22 miles from their homes and 38 from mine, and then backing away. I did not back away. And 3 weeks after my grandmother, Dorothy Weston, died at 84 years old in a care facility bed on a quiet Tuesday morning in March, a lawyer named James Ellison sent certified letters to every member of my family, requesting their presence at a meeting regarding her estate. They arrived expecting routine paperwork. What they found instead was James Ellison at the head of a conference table, 2 manila folders, and a calm that I now understand he had been preparing for almost 2 years. He set a bound legal document in front of my uncle, my aunt, and my father. It was a formal demand letter for $500,000. It referenced a state elder financial abuse complaint that was already in process. My Uncle Gary's face went the color of copy paper. My aunt set her notepad pen down with a small, careful click, like someone placing a weapon on a table. My father looked at his hands, the way people look at things they can no longer pick up. Then Ellison turned to me. He slid a small white envelope across the polished table. I picked it up. Inside was a brass key, small and worn smooth at the teeth, and a folded note card. The handwriting was my grandmother's, careful schoolteacher print, a little slower than it used to be, but unmistakably hers, the same handwriting that had written my name on birthday cards and permission slips and the occasional letter in her cream-colored stationery when I was away at college and she thought I sounded tired. For the one who showed up. Box 22, First Heritage Bank. It has been waiting since 2021. Grandma Dot. I held the key. My hands were steady. I don't know why that surprised me. I had learned steadiness from her. I had learned it one Sunday at a time, in a room with a window that faced a parking lot and fluorescent lighting that hummed slightly if the room got quiet, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup, while the rest of my family was somewhere else entirely, telling each other they were doing the best they could. Before I tell you what was in that box, I need to take you back to the beginning. I need to show you who Dorothy Weston was, what happened to her, what my family did, and what she did in return, quietly, over 2 years, from a nursing home room that my Uncle Gary and my Aunt Sheila and my father visited a combined total of 6 times in 36 months. This is not only a story about money, though there is money in it. It is not only a story about inheritance, though there is inheritance too. It is a story about what loyalty looks like when no one is watching, and what happens when a woman who spent 31 years teaching other people's children how to think decides, at the very end of her life, to teach her own family one last lesson herself. Dorothy Weston taught 4th grade for 31 years at Millbridge Elementary, a public school in a small Virginia town that has more churches than traffic lights. She was not a woman of large gestures or loud emotions. She was a woman of specific ones. She remembered the names of every student she had ever taught. And not just first names, she remembered which ones had struggled with long division, which ones had blossomed when she switched them to a different reading group, which ones had needed someone to notice them, and had been waiting, sometimes for years, for a teacher who would. She kept a leather journal, not a diary in the emotional sense, more of a record. Dates, observations, small facts she wanted to hold on to. She made her own jam every August, peach and blackberry and occasionally blueberry when the season had been right, and she labeled the jars in her careful print with the year and the flavor, and sometimes a small evaluative note in parentheses. Good batch, or too sweet, or one more week would have been better. She had lived in the same white 2-story house on Clover Street for 39 years. The house had a deep wraparound porch and a garden that she maintained herself until her mid-70s, when her knees began making that work more complicated than she was willing to admit. She was stubborn about the garden the way she was stubborn about most things, quietly, without complaint, and for longer than anyone thought she could manage. She grew tomatoes and dahlias and a wild tangle of lavender along the fence that came back every year without her having to do anything about it, which she appreciated. She said lavender was honest. It did what it was going to do, and didn't pretend otherwise. She had 2 children. My father Richard, the youngest, who had grown up to be charming in company and conflict avoidant at home, and his older siblings Gary and Sheila, who had grown up to be the kind of people who used the phrase handling things as a substitute for actually handling things. She had raised all 3 in that house on a teacher's salary and a small inheritance from her own mother, managed carefully over decades with the kind of quiet financial discipline that only becomes visible over time. She was not wealthy by any conventional measure, but she was not without resources either. She owned her house outright. She owned 14 acres of rural land outside of town, purchased in 1979, for reasons she had never fully explained to anyone. She had an investment account she had been contributing to since the early 1980s. Not enormous amounts, but consistent ones, the way she did everything. I had known my grandmother my entire life. What I had not known, what none of us had known, was how clearly and precisely she saw each of her children, how long she had been watching, and what she had been quietly deciding to do about it. It started with a fall on a February morning. Grandma had gone out to the back step to refill the bird feeder, something she had done every morning for as long as any of us could remember, and caught her left foot on the edge of the step and went down. She broke nothing except her wrist, a hairline fracture that the ER doctor said was clean and would heal. She was mobile within hours. She was joking with the nursing staff by afternoon. She told the attending physician that she had given herself worse injuries grading poorly punctuated essays. He laughed. The nurses wrote it in the margin of her chart as a note to themselves. Her doctor cleared her to return home with 3 modifications: grab bars installed in the bathroom, a temporary reduction in outdoor activity, a follow-up appointment in 6 weeks. That was the medical reality of my grandmother's fall. My Uncle Gary called a family meeting the following weekend. I was not invited. I found out about the meeting 3 days later, from my cousin, who had been there but had not spoken during it and was not sure she should be telling me. Gary had stood at the head of my grandmother's kitchen table and described the fall as evidence of a pattern he had been watching for months. He said Grandma was increasingly forgetful, that she had been leaving the stove on, that she had confused an appointment, gotten the date wrong, shown up a week early, that she had said something at Christmas that hadn't made complete sense. He said he was worried about her safety. He said he had discussed it with a doctor, though he did not specify which doctor. He said he had already found a solution. He had toured Meadow Ridge Care Center. He had spoken to their admissions coordinator. He had, in fact, already completed the preliminary intake paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon, before any other family member had been contacted about the situation. The decision was made in one afternoon. Dorothy was not present for it. She was told the following week that she would be moving to a beautiful and well-staffed facility for her recovery, just temporarily, while the family made sure everything was set up safely for her return. She was told she could bring whatever she needed. She packed 2 suitcases. She brought her leather journal, her reading glasses, her current Agatha Christie novel. She was 3/4 of the way through Crooked House and wanted to finish it, and the small framed photograph from her bedroom windowsill of my grandfather Robert and herself at Niagara Falls in 1971. She thought she was going for 6 weeks, maybe 8. She had been a teacher. She understood the concept of temporary arrangements. She nodded, and she packed, and she let them drive her, because she trusted that the people she had raised to be honest were telling her the truth. She never came home. What Gary had not mentioned during that meeting, and what I did not discover until much later, within 90 days of my grandmother's placement, there was a tenant in her house on Clover Street, $1,100 per month, deposited directly into Gary's personal checking account. He kept every cent of it for 26 consecutive months. The day Dorothy was admitted to Meadow Ridge, Sheila offered to take over the finances. She said it with the particular warmth of someone doing you a favor, the kind of warmth that makes it difficult to question without seeming ungrateful. She said that Grandma had enough to worry about with the adjustment, and that managing bills and accounts was something Sheila was happy to handle, that it was no trouble at all, really. Dorothy thanked her. She handed over her 3 credit cards and the contact information for her bank. Over the next 18 months, Sheila used those cards. The charges did not begin dramatically. That is the part that is easy to miss, and important not to. They began with groceries, with gas, with a dinner at a restaurant that could have been a legitimate expense if you were charitable about it. Then came a long weekend trip to Savannah, Georgia in early autumn, booked under Sheila's name and her husband's, charged to Dorothy's visa. A sectional sofa from a furniture store, nearly $3,400. A down payment on a used car, $5,500. Home goods purchases over several months that added up to more than $4,000. Restaurant charges, clothing stores, a vacation rental deposit. Over 18 months, the total ran to approximately $31,240, charged to accounts belonging to a woman sitting in a nursing home 30 minutes away who had not bought anything, gone anywhere, or authorized a single purchase. Dorothy knew something was wrong. She had managed her own finances with precision for 60 years. She could not see the specific transactions. Sheila had the cards, and the paper statements were being redirected, but she felt the absence of control, the way you feel a draft from a window you cannot find. She asked me about it once, on a Sunday afternoon in October in the 2nd year. She held my hand across the small table in her room and said it very quietly, like something she was only half willing to say aloud. "Claire, am I spending a lot of money?" Sheila says I am, but I don't remember buying anything. I wrote that sentence in a notebook when I got home. I wrote the date above it. Over the next 12 months, I would write 10 more entries like it. I started visiting Grandma within a week of her placement. Sundays first, then Wednesdays. She called me twice in the first month, and both times there was something measured in her voice, something careful, like a person choosing words with a precision the situation did not quite seem to require. She did not say she was unhappy. She asked about my patients at work, by name, remembering the ones I had mentioned the week before. She asked whether I had finished the book I was reading. She was performing okay for me the same way I was performing okay for her. And we both understood this, and we both allowed it. Because we had always been alike in this way, willing to hold things gently before we said them. 6 weeks after she was placed, my father called me on a Thursday evening. He said, "Claire, I need you to listen to me carefully, because I'm saying this out of love. Your grandmother is not well. Not in the way we thought at first. It's more than the wrist, more than the fall. The doctors believe she may be in the early stages of cognitive decline. She's been calling people and saying things that don't match reality. She called Gary and accused him of things that didn't happen. She's confused, and when you visit, you reinforce her confusion. You give her someone who listens and agrees, and it makes it harder for her to adjust to the support she needs. Gary and Sheila are managing her care, and they are doing a good job. And the kindest thing you can do right now for her is to give everyone some space." My mother sent a text message 40 minutes later. "Honey, please trust the family on this. She needs consistency right now, not more disruption." I stayed away for 5 weeks. I want to be honest about that. I stayed away and I told myself they might be right, that I was not a doctor, that I did not know everything, that love was not the same as expertise, and that maybe my presence was genuinely making things worse. I told myself this on 5 consecutive Sundays while I sat in my apartment and stared at my phone and did not drive. Then I drove. I went on a Wednesday afternoon, unannounced. I walked through the front entrance of Meadow Ridge and said I was there to see Dorothy Weston. The receptionist checked her computer. She said Dorothy was in the common room. I found her by the window. She was wearing a cardigan that was not hers. Too small, the wrong shade of green. Someone else's initials written on the label in permanent marker, the way care facilities label things so they do not get lost in the laundry. She had lost weight. I could see it in her face, and in the way her wrists looked against the arm of the chair. She was sitting very still, the particular stillness of someone who has stopped expecting things to happen. When she saw me come through the door, she stood up too fast and had to grab the armrest to catch herself. She said, "I knew you'd come. I told them you would." I asked her who she had told. She smiled at me in a way I did not fully understand until much later. I thought she meant she had told the nurses, or perhaps she had been talking out loud to herself the way she sometimes did when she was working through a problem. I did not understand yet that she meant something more specific, that she had told someone particular, that she had, in fact, already made a phone call. I never stayed away again. I want to be clear about that. From that Wednesday afternoon forward, I never missed a visit unless I was physically ill with something contagious, and even then I called and I stayed on the phone for as long as she wanted. I want to stop here for one moment. If you have ever been told by your own family to stay away from someone you loved, if your presence was reframed as a problem, as disruption, as something that needed to be managed and contained, I need you to know that I understand exactly how that feels. You begin to question yourself. You wonder if you are being selfish, if your desire to be there is really about you rather than them, if the most loving thing you could do is simply disappear and let the people who say they have it handled go ahead and handle it. That doubt is real, and it is worth naming, because it is how people get separated from each other when someone has decided that the separation serves them. If this story is landing somewhere true for you, please hit the like button so I know I'm not telling it alone. Drop your location in the comments below, and stay with me. Because what my grandmother was quietly doing during those 3 years while my family told me to leave and while I refused is one of the most extraordinary things I have ever had to reconstruct after the fact. Here is what 3 years looks like, in specific detail, because I am tired of care being described in abstractions. I am tired of we were there for her, and she knew she was loved, used as substitutes for an account of what actually happened. Let me give you the account. Every Sunday for 3 years, I drove 38 minutes to Meadow Ridge. I brought food she actually wanted, because the facility's food was nutritionally adequate and texturally disappointing in the way that institutional food often is. I brought tomato soup from the deli she had liked before the placement. I brought cornbread I made on Friday evenings because it improved by Sunday. I brought peach preserves from the farmer's market because Grandma had told me early on that the facility's jam tasted like plastic, and I did not forget that. And I brought the good kind every time until she told me she had a jar saved and to wait until next week. I managed her laundry personally beginning in the 4th month, after the facility lost 3 of her sweaters in the industrial washing process. Grandma had one cornflower blue cardigan she had owned for 12 years that was irreplaceable to her, not because it was expensive, but because my grandfather had bought it for her birthday in the last year of his life. When I found out that sweater had gone missing, I filed a formal complaint with the facility manager and drove to 3 thrift stores looking for something similar. I never found it. I sat in my car in the 3rd parking lot and cried about a sweater for 10 minutes. Then I went back on Sunday and did not tell her I had looked. I attended every quarterly care plan meeting the formal reviews, held 4 times a year, in which the facility's nursing staff, social worker, and administrative coordinator sit down with the family to review the residents' health, daily function, and care needs. My Uncle Gary, who held legal power of attorney over my grandmother's medical decisions, attended 0 of these meetings in 3 years. I attended all 12. I asked questions. I took notes. I followed up on action items in writing. When my grandmother developed a urinary tract infection in the 2nd year, that went undiagnosed and untreated for 4 days because two nurses each believed the other had already notified the physician. I filed a formal complaint with the Virginia Department of Health. I also hired a private patient advocate, a woman named Deborah, who had been doing this work for 18 years at $800 out of my own pocket, to conduct a monthly chart review and flag anything that needed attention. Deborah told me, 6 months in, that in her experience, residents who had an engaged family member were statistically better cared for than those who did not. She said it without sentiment. She said it like a fact, which it was. I learned the name of every nurse and aide on every shift. I brought a card at Christmas for the whole unit. I brought candy at Halloween. I remembered birthdays. I brought Angela, the night nurse who had been there 11 years, a book she mentioned wanting to read, and I wrapped it. These were not calculated investments, or at least I did not think of them that way at the time. I was just doing what seemed obvious, which was treating the people who took care of my grandmother as people worth knowing. The effect, whether I intended it or not, was that Dorothy's call light got answered a little faster than some others. I am not ashamed of that effect. I brought art supplies. Grandma had painted watercolors for most of her adult life, landscapes, mostly. Hills and fields and creek bends, the kind of quiet rural scenery she had driven past her whole life and learned to see carefully. I set up a small painting station on her windowsill, a plastic cup for water, her good brushes in a ceramic mug from home, a travel-size set of watercolor paints. We painted together on Sunday afternoons. I am not a painter. My trees look like the work of someone describing a tree to a person who has never seen one. Grandma was patient about my trees in the way she was patient about most things precisely, with specific and gentle feedback, like a teacher who sees the effort and decides to meet it there. We made 12 paintings together over 2 years. They are not masterpieces. 3 of them are barely recognizable as landscapes. But they exist, and they were made on Sunday afternoons in a room with fluorescent lights and a window facing a parking lot, and the fact of their existence is not nothing. I read to her every visit. Dorothy had loved mysteries her entire life, specifically, stubbornly, Agatha, Christie, above all others. She had read all of them at least once, and several of them 2 or 3 times, and she still had opinions about them, strong ones, that she was happy to defend at length. We worked through the complete collection from the beginning, in order of publication. She was also, I realize now, the only person in my family who had ever truly watched me the way she watched her students. She paid the particular attention that requires you to set aside what you want to be true and simply observe what is. She noticed when I was struggling without asking about it, and she created conditions where I could say something or not say something, and either was acceptable. She never pressured me into a version of myself that was easier for her to love. She loved the version that actually existed, which is rarer than it sounds. She had opinions about Hercule Poirot that she held with great conviction. She believed that Miss Marple was underestimated by nearly every other character in every book she appeared in, and she considered this both narratively significant and personally resonant. I let her win the arguments. She was usually right. In the final year, when walking became harder and the sameness of the days had a weight I could feel pressing on her even when she did not name it, I brought a portable Bluetooth speaker to our Sunday visits. I made a playlist, big band music from the 1940s, Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, the music she had told me once she had danced to when she was 19 years old, and her life had felt as wide as anything. On Sundays in the last year, we listened to that music. Sometimes she closed her eyes. Sometimes she moved her hands in her lap, in a way that was barely perceptible, a ghost of a movement, like a memory of dancing. I did not talk during those songs. I sat there and let her have them completely. My Uncle Gary visited my grandmother twice in 3 years. Both visits fell on holidays. Both lasted under 45 minutes. He brought supermarket flowers on his second visit, a variety to which Grandma had been mildly allergic her entire life. She had sneezed through multiple holidays worth of similar arrangements going back to the 1990s. He did not know this. He had never paid attention to it. My Aunt Sheila visited 4 times. My father, Richard, visited Dorothy in the final 26 months of her life. 0 times. Not once. He sent a card at Christmas both years. The return address was printed by a machine. They told people at church and at neighborhood gatherings and at family events that they were doing everything they could. My cousin heard my father say this at a barbecue in the summer of the second year. He said it with genuine feeling. He believed it, I think. That is the most complicated part. Here is the part of the story I only learned after she was gone. The part that Ellison walked me through in his office the week after the meeting, with a patience that told me he had been preparing to tell it for a long time. 6 months after her placement at Meadow Ridge, not confused, not in cognitive decline, not the woman my family had described in their careful meetings, Dorothy Weston asked Angela, the night nurse she had come to trust, to help her make a phone call on a Thursday afternoon. She had a number written on the last page of her leather journal, in the back, below a grocery list from 2 years before that. She had never erased. The number belonged to James Ellison. Dorothy had attended an estate planning seminar at the local public library 3 years before her placement. She had seen a notice in the county paper, clipped it, tucked it into the front pocket of her journal. After the seminar, she had made an appointment with Ellison and retained him quietly, using a personal checking account that Sheila did not know existed, at an address that still went to a post office box downtown that Dorothy had maintained for 30 years for reasons she had never explained. She had paid his initial retainer and given him the basic outline of her situation, and said she would be in touch when she needed him. 6 months into Meadow Ridge, she called him. What followed, over the next 2 years, was methodical and precise, and entirely invisible to my family. Through in-person consultations that Ellison conducted during visiting hours when no family was present, through carefully signed documents that Angela witnessed, through a process that was legal and valid and unassailable, because Dorothy Weston was of entirely sound mind and had 3 years of medical records from her own physician to prove it, my grandmother did the following. She revoked Gary's power of attorney over her medical and financial decisions. She established a new power of attorney naming me. She rewrote her will entirely. She transferred the 14 acres of rural land into a trust with my name as the sole beneficiary. She updated her investment account to name me directly, outside the estate. She designated all personal property, her journals, her paintings, her books, her cream-colored stationery, every object in her life that carried meaning to me by name in the revised document. She authorized Ellison to compile and file a formal elder financial abuse complaint with the state of Virginia, documenting the credit card charges Sheila had made across 18 months, the rental income Gary had collected on her house without disclosure or consent, and the related financial damages. The total, assembled by Ellison from bank records and credit card statements obtained through the legal process, came to just over $498,000. In the formal demand letter, he presented it as $500,000. She told no one she was doing any of this, not Angela, beyond what was necessary for the witnessing, not me. She sat across from me every Sunday and she listened to Tommy Dorsey and argued about Agatha Christie, and asked about my patients by name, and painted watercolors on her windowsill, and she said nothing about what she was building on the work. Other side of those afternoons, she needed to know something. She needed to know that what I gave her was given without expectation, that I was not there because I thought there was something in it for me, that the tomato soup and the good preserves and the portable speaker were not investments. She needed 3 years of Sundays to be sure, and she took them, and she watched carefully, the way she had always watched her students, with the patience of someone who knows that the thing you are waiting to see will show itself if you give it enough time. I have to pause here. When Ellison laid out that timeline for me, when he showed me the dates, the documents, the sequence of decisions my grandmother had made from a room with a window facing a parking lot, I sat in his office for a very long time without speaking. I kept thinking about all those Sundays, all those drives, all those times I sat in that room thinking I was giving her something, and not understanding that she was simultaneously, quietly, giving me something back. Something she had been working on longer than I had known to look for. If you are still with me, please subscribe and drop your location in the comments. I want to know who is sitting with this story right now. Dorothy passed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was already in my car, already on the highway, driving to her. I had started going 5 days a week in the final month, and Tuesday was one of my days. I was 20 minutes from Meadow Ridge when my phone rang. It was the overnight nurse, not Angela, someone whose voice I knew but whose name I always confused with another. She said it quietly, and she said she was sorry. I pulled off at the next exit and sat in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes before I could see clearly enough to drive anywhere. I arranged the funeral. I called the family members one by one. I sat in the front row at the service in the church where she had taught Sunday school for 22 years. My Uncle Gary gave a short eulogy. He talked about her devotion, her warmth, her sacrifices. He cried. I watched him cry, and I felt a tiredness so complete it was indistinguishable from grief, which perhaps it was. Afterward, I organized the reception at the church hall. I made tomato soup and cornbread because I did not know what else to do with my hands. People told me it was wonderful and asked who had catered it. I said I had made it. They seemed surprised. Nobody asked me how I was doing. Gary mentioned twice during the reception, to 2 different people, that he would need to get into the house soon to deal with things. I drove home. I sat in my car in the apartment parking lot for 25 minutes before I could make myself go inside. 3 weeks after the funeral, certified letters arrived from Ellison's office to all family members of record. They were formal and brief, as legal letters tend to be. A request to attend a meeting regarding the estate of Dorothy Ruth Weston. A date. A time. A suite number on the 4th floor of a building downtown. The family assumed it was routine. These things happen after a death. There is paperwork. There are accounts to close and documents to sign. Gary arrived looking organized and purposeful, already talking in the parking lot about the property, about the house sale timeline, about what he expected the land to be worth on the current market. Sheila had her notepad. My father looked tired in the way he always looks when something is happening that he would prefer not to examine too closely. We sat around the conference table. Ellison came in carrying 2 folders and set them on the table in front of him without opening them yet. He greeted everyone by name. He thanked everyone for coming. Then he began. He started with the financial records. He went through the credit card charges line by line, methodically, without drama, the way a teacher might go through a student's work. The weekend trip to Savannah, the sectional sofa, the car down payment, the home goods store. He read the dates and the amounts and the vendor names in the same steady tone from beginning to end, and the room got very quiet in the way rooms get quiet when everyone in them has realized simultaneously that the ground has shifted. He set the total on the table in writing, $31,240. Then he presented the rental income. 26 months of payments collected on Dorothy's house on Clover Street, never disclosed to the estate, never shared, deposited into Gary's personal account. He set that figure down. Then he described the elder financial abuse complaint that had been filed with the state of Virginia. He said the complaint was already in process. He said the legal options available to the family at this stage were narrow, and that his client, Dorothy herself, having prepared this in advance, had anticipated and documented the resistance she expected. He set the formal bound demand letter in front of Gary, Sheila, and my father. $500,000. Gary's face went completely bloodless. He pushed back from the table slightly, not standing, just creating distance, the way people do when they want to leave a room but cannot yet. Sheila set her pen down with a small, precise click. My father looked at his hands in his lap. Then Ellison turned to me. He slid the small white envelope across the table. I picked it up. I read the note card. I looked at the brass key. I set it down in front of me on the table and kept my hand over it and breathed. Then Ellison opened the second folder and read the will. The 14-acre parcel of land, held in trust, mine. The investment account, transferred by beneficiary designation outside the estate, mine. The proceeds of the house sale, after the estate's legal obligations were resolved, mine. All personal property, the journals, the paintings, the books, the cream stationery, every object that had been hers and that she had loved mine. The family received nothing except the demand letter. I want to tell you what that room felt like as Ellison read those numbers. The silence had a texture I had not experienced before in a room full of people. Gary's breathing was audible. Sheila had moved her hands below the table where I could no longer see them. My father had not looked up from his lap in several minutes. And Ellison just kept reading, steady, measured, without satisfaction and without apology. The way you read facts when the facts are sufficient on their own and do not require decoration. Gary said he would contest it. Ellison let him finish and then said, without any change in tone, that Dorothy had been of entirely sound mind and that he had documentation to that effect from her physician, from facility staff, and from multiple witnessed and notarized legal instruments spanning 2 years. He said the power of attorney revocation and reestablishment had been legally valid and properly executed. He said the elder financial abuse complaint was a separate matter from the estate and would proceed on its own timeline. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. I looked at the brass key sitting on the table in front of me. I thought about a Sunday in October, the second year, when Grandma had held my hand across the small table in her room and asked me quietly whether she was spending money she didn't remember spending. I thought about writing that sentence in my notebook when I got home. I thought about all the sentences I had written down. She had known exactly what she was building. She had known exactly when it would be finished. And she had not said a word to me about any of it, because she had needed the silence to tell her something true. I went to First Heritage Bank on a Thursday morning, alone. The bank manager led me to the vault. Box 22 was near the bottom row, one of the smaller ones, a dull silver rectangle with a keyhole that the brass key fit perfectly on the first try. I carried the box to a small private room with a chair and a table and a lamp that cast a warm circle of light. I sat down and opened it slowly, the way you open something you are not ready to finish. There were 3 volumes of her leather journal, the Meadow Ridge years, one for each. I opened the first volume to a Sunday entry from the 8th month of her placement. My name was in the first line. She had recorded every visit, not just mine all visits, or the absence of them, but mine in the most detail. The date, the length, what I brought, what we talked about, what made her laugh. She had noted when I looked tired. She had noted when I seemed worried about something I wasn't saying. She had written, in the 3rd year, in an entry from a February Sunday, Claire brought the portable speaker, Tommy Dorsey. I closed my eyes and was 22 for 4 minutes. When I opened them, she was still there. She is always still there. There was a photograph I had never seen. Angela had taken it on a Sunday in the first year candid, neither of us posing, both of us looking at something in the parking lot below the window. We were laughing. I cannot remember what we were laughing at. A bird, possibly. Something in the parking lot that was funny in a small, ordinary way. What I remember is that in the photograph, my grandmother's face is completely alive. She is not performing contentment. She is not managing anything. She is just laughing, in a room with a window, next to me. There were 12 watercolor paintings, every single one we had made together, including my terrible trees. And there was the letter. I read it in the car, in the bank parking lot, with the engine off and the key in my lap and the heater ticking as it cooled. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in my jacket pocket where I have carried it, or kept it close, ever since. She did not write about money. She did not name Gary or Sheila. She did not explain the legal architecture she had constructed. She trusted Ellison to convey that. What she wrote about was simpler than any of that, and harder. She wrote that she had been afraid, in the beginning, that I would stop coming. That she had been told enough times by enough people, including her own son, that she was confused, that her perceptions could not be trusted, that she was a burden whose opinions had become unreliable. She wrote that there had been a period, in those first months at Meadow Ridge, when she had started to wonder whether they might be right about something. Not about the cognitive decline, which she knew she did not have, but about something deeper. Whether she had always been too much to love in the specific ways she needed, whether her own children's distance was evidence of something true about her. And then I kept coming. She wrote, I have been a teacher for 31 years. I know the difference between a student who shows up because attendance is taken and one who shows up because they cannot imagine doing otherwise. You have always been the second kind. I needed to watch it one more time to be entirely certain. You gave me 3 years of Sundays and you never once asked me what was in it for you, because you are not a person who asks that question, and that is the rarest and most necessary thing I have ever known in a person. She wrote that she had not told me about the will or the attorney or the trust for the same reason she had not, when I was a child, told me I was her favorite. Not because it was not true, but because the telling would change the nature of the thing. She needed what I gave her to be given freely, without a ledger. She needed to know that the soup and the preserves and the terrible trees and the Tommy Dorsey on Sunday afternoons were not investments in an outcome. They needed to be just what they were: presents, chosen, repeated, unconditional. She wrote about the Sunday afternoons in a way that made me set the letter down for a moment and look out through the windshield at the parking lot and breathe. She wrote that she had watched me paint my terrible trees with the kind of complete and patient focus she had once given to her most struggling students, the ones who needed someone to believe in the attempt before they could believe in the result. She said she had watched me hand her the brush on the weeks when her hands were unsteady, quietly, without comment, the same way she had once handed a pencil back to a crying 8-year-old who had given up on a math problem and needed someone to silently say, "Try again." She said I had not learned that from nowhere. She wrote about the morning she had woken at 3 a.m. from a bad dream she could not remember, and had lain in the dark for an hour believing, with the unmoored certainty that 3 a.m. provides, that no one was coming, that she had become the kind of person no one came for. And then she had thought about the fact that I was coming on Sunday, that I was already planning to come, that I had been coming for 2 years, and would come again, regardless of what she had to offer or what the visit cost me. She said that thought had been, in that dark hour, the most substantial thing in the room. More substantial than the wall. More substantial than the door. She wrote, "I couldn't protect you from her your whole life. I couldn't make your father see you the way I saw you. I could not give you the childhood you deserved in the family you were given, but I could make sure that when the loudest voices in the room had finished saying what you weren't, you would have ground under your feet that no one could take. That is all I was ever doing. It took me longer than I planned, but I got there." The letter ended with one sentence, in her schoolteacher print, a little slower now, the letters slightly larger than they used to be. "I know her, and I know you, and you are not the same. You never were. Now you know it too." Gary hired a lawyer. Ellison had anticipated this and had spent 2 years making the case airtight. Dorothy's medical records confirmed consistent mental clarity going back to admission. Angela's notes confirmed it. The facility's own documentation confirmed it. The power of attorney revocation had been executed with 2 witnesses and a notary public. The will had been signed in the presence of Ellison and 2 independent witnesses. The elder financial abuse complaint had been filed with supporting documentation that Gary's own financial records did not contradict. The legal process moved forward. Sheila sent me a text message 2 weeks after the meeting. It said, "I hope you're happy." I read it once and put my phone face down and went back to the patient file I had been reviewing. I did not reply. My father called once. He said he did not understand why she had done it. He sounded genuinely confused, which is not the same thing as innocent. I said, "I understand why." He was quiet for a moment. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Not in anger, but because it was the complete and accurate response, and there was nothing to add to it. I took 2 weeks off from work. In late April, I drove out to the 14 acres for the first time, alone, on a Saturday morning when the sky was the particular blue it gets in Virginia in spring, before the humidity settles in. Wild flowers had come up along the fence line Queen Anne's lace, and something low and purple that I did not know the name of. There was a pond I had not known existed, at the far end of the property, with an old wooden dock that listed slightly to the right. I walked the length of the dock and stood at the end of it and looked at the water catching the morning light and listened to the birds working the field behind me. My grandmother had bought this land in 1979, before I was born, before she could have known what kind of person I would become or whether I would be the kind of person worth leaving anything to. She bought it and she held it, and she put my name on it when she had finished her legal work, and she never said a word, because she did not want the knowing to change what I gave her. She wanted to find out the truth. She found it apparently one Sunday at a time. I sat down on the dock with my thermos and poured coffee into her mug white ceramic with small blue irises painted around the rim, slightly chipped at the base. The mug that had sat on her windowsill at Meadow Ridge for 3 years and that I had taken home after she passed. the same way I had taken home the cracked coffee mug from her kitchen the day of the house cleaning, holding it with both hands like something fragile that had survived. I drank my coffee. Heron came out of the reeds at the far end of the pond and flew the full length of the water in a long, low arc and disappeared into the tree line. The dock held. The morning was warm. Somewhere in the field behind me, something was moving through the tall grass. She had bought this land when she was 43 years old. She had held it for 45 years. She had trusted that someday I would be standing at the end of it in the spring light, understanding everything she had not been able to say out loud. I said it out loud for her. I said, "I showed up, Grandma, the way I always do. I am still an occupational therapist. I still drive the Civic. I still live in the one-bedroom apartment with the elevator that breaks once a month. I have a piece of land I have not built anything on yet, and a savings account that lets me sleep at night, and a job I find genuinely meaningful on the days when I am too tired to feel anything else. I have joined a volunteer program that visits isolated residents in care facilities, patients who have no family coming on Sundays. I go on Wednesday afternoons now. I bring good coffee in a thermos. I learn names. I remember them the following week. I think about what Dorothy Weston built often, and I think about it in the particular terms of what it required. It required her to be clear-eyed about her children in a way that parents are not always able to be, because clarity of that kind is painful, and most people would rather soften it. It required her to act on what she saw, rather than what she hoped. It required her to plan across a timeline that most people would not sustain, because sustaining it meant carrying a secret through every Sunday afternoon visit, and every shared watercolor painting, and every argument about Agatha Christie, and never letting the secret change the quality of her attention. She did all of this while sitting in a nursing home room, while her son did not visit, while her daughter-in-law sent texts telling me to back off, while her own credit cards were being used at furniture stores and vacation rentals without her knowledge or consent. She did it quietly, and she did it without complaint. And she did it the way she had always done everything, precisely, patiently, and completely. That is who she was. I want that on record, because the record matters. The photograph from the nursing home, the candid one where we are both laughing at something in the parking lot, is the only framed photograph in my apartment. It sits on the windowsill above my kitchen table. Every morning when I make coffee in her iris mug, I look at it. It is a photograph of two people who did not know they were being photographed, which means it is the truest photograph I have. If you are watching this and you are the person who shows up, if you are the one making the drive, learning the names, sitting in the room on afternoons when no one else is there, doing the invisible work that does not get named at family gatherings or recognized in the narratives your family tells about itself, I want to say something directly to you. Someone sees it. Someone is watching and keeping the count and noticing the specific things you bring, and the way you remember what they said last week, and the way you come back even when it is hard, and even when no one has thanked you, and even when someone in your family has suggested that coming is more about you than it is about them. That someone may not be able to tell you what they see. They may not be able to tell you until they are gone, but they are keeping the record, the way my grandmother kept hers in a leather journal, in precise dated entries, with specific detail, the way a good teacher notes the things that matter. My grandmother could not protect me from everything. She could not make my father see me the way she saw me. She could not go back and repair what was already broken. But she did what she could do, which was build something solid underneath me, quietly, over decades, from a nursing home room with a window that faced a parking lot. She built it from borrowed phone calls and witness documents and a patient advocate I did not know about, and a lawyer she had called herself 3 years before anyone put her in that room. The money mattered. I will not pretend otherwise, but the letter is what I carry in my pocket, because in the letter she said the thing I had needed to hear my entire life, and she said it in her schoolteacher handwriting on cream-colored paper. I know her, and I know you, and you are not the same. You are not defined by the people who underestimate you. You are not a minor character in the story your family has decided to tell. You are defined by what you do when there is nothing to gain, when the drive is long, when the coffee is bad, when the window faces a parking lot, when no one is taking attendance, when you come anyway. That is the measure. That is the only measure that has ever mattered. My grandmother knew that. She trusted it. She staked 45 years of careful planning on it, and she was right. If you are the person who shows up, you already are exactly what you think you might be. Someone has already made a plan for you. You just haven't found the envelope yet. There is a particular kind of grief that comes after you have been the caretaker. People do not always know to name it or to look for it, but it is real and it is specific. It is not only the grief of losing the person, it is the grief of losing the structure of your weeks, the purpose that filled in the mornings and the evenings, the ritual of the drive and the thermos and the parking lot and the walk through the front entrance, and the way you learned to read the quality of a day from the way someone was sitting in their chair. For months after Dorothy died, I caught myself on Sunday mornings already halfway to the door before I remembered. That 38-minute drive existed in my body as a habit, as a route, as a known shape of time that had belonged to her. I had to learn to fill it differently. I am still learning. The volunteer program helps. My patients at the clinic help. The dock at the end of the 14 acres helps on the mornings when I can get there before work and just stand at the end of it and watch the heron work the far end of the pond. I think about what she said in the letter about the 3 in the morning hour, the hour when she had woken and believed no one was coming. I think about everyone who is awake at 3 in the morning believing that. I think about the fact that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply make it undeniably true that they are coming, that they have always been coming, that they are already on the way. You do not have to wait for a brass key and a leather journal full of dated entries. You do not have to wait for a lawyer's meeting, or a bound demand letter, or a piece of land you did not know existed. What you are doing is already real. The fact that no one is filming it or acknowledging it or including it in the narrative they tell about the family does not change what it is. The account exists. Someone is keeping it. My grandmother kept hers in 3 leather journals in a safe deposit box in a bank vault in a town where she had lived and taught school for most of her adult life, and she left it where I would find it. And I found it, and now I am standing at the end of a dock in the spring light with a coffee mug that has her irises painted on it, and the heron is flying the length of the pond, and the ground is under my feet. She told me once, when I was 7 years old and had decided that a drawing I had made was no good and had crumpled it up, that the problem was not the drawing. The problem was that I had decided before it was finished. She smoothed it out on the table and looked at it for a long time and then said, "It is better than you think. Give it more time." She was a 4th grade teacher. She said this to children every day of her working life. She also meant it about everything else. She meant it about me. She gave me time, and what she built while she was giving it to me was more than I could have asked for, more than I knew to want, more than I will probably fully understand for a long time. Give it more time. That is the thing she would tell you if she could. Whatever you are growing in the dark, without acknowledgement, without applause, without anyone keeping the public count, give it more time. The account is being kept. The record exists. The key is already made. You just have not found the envelope yet. That is my story. Thank you for being here until the very end. That is my story. Thank you for staying until the end. If you believe in the kind of love that plans quietly and protects fiercely and never asks to be seen, hit that like button. If you know what it is to be the one who drives the distance while others say they are doing everything they can, subscribe. And if you have lived something like this, if there is someone in your life who held a door open for you when no one was watching, share it in the comments below. I read every single one. There is another story waiting for you in the description. I will see you there.